Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. So, you all know very well that this is a series which is based on Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's book Meezan. And this book itself is his understanding of the contents of religion, contents of Islam, the way he has understood it. And according to his opinion, he has imagined the whole framework of Islam, and this exactly is what we are studying also. We started off last week with this chapter. Basically, this is the second prelude to his book, and it is called The Framework of Islam. It imagines the whole of Islam in the form of a knitted unit, and we see that prior to him, the whole framework of Islam. So I was just talking about the fact that as far as the framework of Islam is concerned, we have two other frameworks which are famous and very prominent. So the most dominant among them and the most prominent among them is the framework presented by Imam Ghazali in his book Ihya Ulumuddin, which is a very famous book, one of the most outstanding works of our earlier period. And then we have the second framework of Islam, which is presented primarily by Imam Ibn Taymiyyah in the 7th century. And this is primarily the jihad framework, which can also be called the culmination of that, can also be called the political Islam framework, in which Islam is imagined as a political force. So these are the two other parallel frameworks of Islam which have been put forth by other scholars. So Ustaz Ghamidi says that as far as he is concerned, the framework of Islam that he has presented is the one that does not agree. I mean, he does not agree with the frameworks which have been presented by Imam Ghazali or Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. And he says that this is the framework, according to his understanding, which the Sahaba or the companions were. They advocated this framework. Obviously, Imam Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah also say that they have derived this from the earliest of sources, and they relate to their frameworks. And their frameworks also to the Sahaba and Prophet himself, but it is beyond the scope of this study, in which we can compare these frameworks and see how the other fares or they contradict one another. So we'll confine ourselves here to the framework of Islam, which has been presented by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. We have also seen that as far as this framework is concerned, we have covered four major topics of interest. So you can see the essence of religion, definition of religion, contents of religion, and prophets and messengers. So these were the four topics that have been covered. In totality, you can see the 10 topics that are being displayed before you. They are the ones which basically knit the whole framework of Islam in the form of a unit. They bring it together in the form of a complete interpretation of religion. And of course, they place all these components of religion in their places. So today we will try to finish off this, or at least try to cover some portion, starting off with the fifth point, which is purpose of divine books. So as far as the purpose of divine books is concerned, we will also be studying the nature of these contents in the form of some of the important points that have been raised. So as far as this is concerned, let us start off with this purpose of divine books that has been presented by Ustad Ghamidi. So generally, the Almighty has revealed His books with prophets and messengers, and according to the Quran, the purpose of their revelation is to judge between what is right and what is wrong, so that people can resolve their differences through them. So remember, this judgment of right and wrong is regarding religious issues. It does not relate to any other issue. So anything which comes up amongst people as a difference of opinion among religious issues. So the Quran says that the purpose of these divine books, including itself, is to resolve these differences, and in this manner people are able to adhere to truth in this matter. So the words of the Quran, as you can see, are وَأَنزَلَ مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِيَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ فِي مَا اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ. And something very similar is وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. And with these prophets, He sent down His book as the decisive truth, so that it may settle these differences among people. And The second verse, which is a verse from Surah Furqan, the 57th verse, it translates as, "And with these messengers we sent down our book, which is the judge between the right and the wrong, so that through it people are able to adhere to justice regarding what is the truth." So it is clear from these verses that as far as the Quran is concerned, the responsibility of these books, the purpose of these books is to resolve differences. And I think I gave this example that at times there are differences which are carried forth from the previous versions or editions of religion or Islam, as we can say. And so the Quran decides amongst these differences. A very prominent difference, of course, which has been carried forth from Christianity is that they regard Jesus to be the Son of God. And the Quran has given its verdict, and it said that this concept of Trinity, which, of course, to the Christians is a concept that relates to monotheism, and they think that this is not any sort of polytheism. It is basically monotheism, and it is a single God who is represented in these three forms. So, although the Quran still accepts the Christians to be primarily monotheists, that they uphold Tawheed, but the Quran clearly says that they are upholders of Tawheed in a deviant nature. So the Tawheed that they subscribe to, or the monotheism that they subscribe to, can be called a deviant nature of subscription to this all-important creed. So the Quran has given its verdict and said that La taqulu salasa, that don't say that God is three. Intahu khairul lakum, that you must abstain so that it should be better for you. So I'm just giving you one example. Otherwise, clearly there have been other examples. So the Quran gives its verdict as do all divine books. So if you look at, for example, the Old Testament, the Torah, the Quran calls the Torah to be Al-Furqan as well. And in its own times, it was the distinguisher between right and wrong. It was something that settled differences. So it is very important to note this, that in the presence of these divine books, we are in a position to resolve religious differences because we now have a reference point. In the absence of any reference point, we could not have resolved any religious differences. And the very revelation of the Quran is the final book, which is preserved in its original language, is now something that can be a means of resolving these differences. Previous books, they are not found in their original language, and hence they could no longer have acted as Meezan and Furqan and any decisive truth. Of course, in their own times when they were preserved, they did so, but now this is something which lies with the Quran. Now, the next thing which Ustaz Ghamidi has discussed is the responsibility of Inzar, which is the next important point, that as far as the situation is concerned, that the chain of prophets and messengers which began with Adam and ended on Muhammad, of course, this is something that existed in a particular point of time. Now, after Prophet Muhammad's departure, divine revelation has ceased, and the institution of prophethood, of course, stands terminated. So, the responsibility of Inzar, remember, Inzar means to warn people of the hereafter, and this was the primary duty of prophets and messengers. So, now this responsibility has now passed on to the scholars of this ummah until the day of judgment. So, the responsibility of Inzar, which was the original responsibility or the main responsibility of the prophets and messengers of God after their departure, is now relegated to and delegated to the scholars of this ummah. Of course, with this difference, that as far as the inzar of a messenger is concerned, it always culminates in a worldly day of judgment. But of course, in the case of human beings, which are not prophets or messengers, this does not take place. So they continue to warn people of the hereafter. And for this, as you can see, the Quranic verse that is being cited is this verse 122 of Surah Tawbah. It says, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. And it was not possible for all the believers to undertake this job. So why did not a few from every group among them come forward to gain sound knowledge in religion and warn the people of their respective nations, when after acquiring knowledge they return to them, that they take heed? So clearly, this responsibility is something that is delegated to after God's messengers, to the scholars of this ummah. The Almighty has specified that this inzar, or this warning, shall the vehicle or the means of this warning shall be nothing but the Quran. So we find verses in the Quran as Zakir bil Quran man yakhafu wa'id, which means that remind through the Quran whoever fears my warning. So the basis of this warning, the basis of this inzar must be the Quran itself. It must not be any story, no folklore, no hadith, anything, but primarily the Quran itself. And then in another instance, the Quran says, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا, and through this Quran, fight with them with full force. I mean, jihad bil Quran, or basically expending your effort to the Quran, it has been called as the great jihad. So with full force. So in other words, this jihad, which is done through the Quran, of course, has to be done in the form of reasoning, in the form of arguing in favor of the points of view of the Quran regarding different points that it wants to propound to people. So for this very reason, the Prophet is also called a Nazir, which means a warner for the whole world. And scholars of religion actually communicate his inzar, remember, his inzar to people. So we have the Quran telling us that تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْقُرْآنَ عَلَىٰ عَبْدِهِ لِيَكُونَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ نَذِيرًا, which means that blessed be he who has revealed Al-Furqan to his servant, that it may warn the whole world. And at another place also, we see that the Quran tells us, وَأُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لِأُنذِرَكُمْ بِهِ وَمَنْ بَلَغَ, and this Quran has been revealed to me. So the Prophet is actually expounding this verse and telling people that this Quran has been revealed to me that I may thereby warn you and those whom it may reach. So this is something which the responsibility of Inzar is switched to. It is delegated to the scholars of religion, and as you can clearly see that this warning has to be done through the Quran, which means that the Quran has to be read out. It is the Quran that must be expounded before people, not any tafsir, not any other detail, but directly the Quran itself. And you will see, dear viewers, that the impact that the Quran can have on the hearts of people is unmatched. It's unparalleled. No person can rival the Quran. This is an obvious thing. So it is through the Quran that this is going to happen. And if it's not happening through the Quran, then this is a benchmark from which we should know that we would not be doing our due if we are not basing this warning on the Quran. Because the Quran itself, if you just read it out to people or you just give its translation to people who are not conversant with Arabic, it would suffice, it would be sufficient that people just go through it and then they can gain the message of it merely by reading it. The next topic which Ustad Ghamidi has thereby come up in this structure of religion or the framework of Islam is how we can get to the name of Islam itself. So the religion that we are discussing at the moment is called Islam, and the Almighty has said in the Quran that no other religion is acceptable to Him. So the words are وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي, in fact it is إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. The religion which is the only true religion in God's sight is Islam, and he that chooses a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted from him, and in the world to come he will surely be among the losers. Which clearly tells us that just as the word Islam is used for the whole corpus of religion, it is also at times used to imply its outer form. And as regards to its outer form, it basically consists of 5 things. And these 5 things include, of course, bearing witness that there is no God besides Allah and Muhammad is His messenger, which is the kalima that we recite, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And then the second thing is offering the prayer. The third thing is paying zakat. The fourth thing is keeping the fasts of Ramadan. And of course, the fifth thing, which has been left out in this slide, obviously, is offering the Hajj of the Baytullah. So basically, the outer structure of this religion is also called Islam, just as its contents are also called Islam. So outwardly. And when the Quran says that no other religion is acceptable, remember, it means that it's not that different prophets of God brought a different religion in their own time. So right from Adam up to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the last of the prophets, the Almighty always sent down Islam. It was called by the same name, and it brought the same message. it consisted primarily of the same tenets of faith and, of course, the same tenets of morality as well. Obviously, parts of the Sharia did evolve and they did change, but the crux of religion, which is, of course, morality and faith, they always remain the same. So the Almighty says that anyone who presents any other religion than Islam, it would not be acceptable. So, as far as the framework of Islam is concerned, the next thing that we know from this is that it has also been explained by Prophet Muhammad, and the words are: Islam is that you bear witness that there is no God besides Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and be diligent in the prayer, and pay the zakah, and keep the fasts of Ramadan. So, this is basically a hadith of the Prophet, as you can see. So, not only the Quran has specified the word Islam for the outer aspect of religion, but also this hadith as well. Now, just as the religion has an outer aspect through which it is called, we have an inner aspect of Islam also, and that is called Iman. So, Iman is the correct name. And about Iman, we know that the Quran says that the inner aspect of religion is Iman, and it's also called faith or belief. And as per the details which are mentioned in the Quran, this inner aspect also consists of 5 things. So, just as the outer aspect of religion, which is called Islam, it consisted of 5 things. So, professing the kalima, which means La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, of course, and then we had offering the prayer, paying the zakat, keeping the fast of Ramadan, and offering the Hajj of Baytullah. In a very similar way, the inner aspect of religion, which is called Iman, it also consists of 5 things. So these are Iman in God, which is belief in God, or Iman in the angels, or belief in the angels, belief in the prophets, belief in divine books, belief in the day of judgment. So these 5 tenets are again tenets that we can call are the inner aspects of religion. And the Quran actually has referred to them. So it's not just a deduction, it's not just an inference. It is something which is directly based on the Quran. So the Quran says, "Amana Rasulu bima unzila ilayhi min Rabbihi wal mu'minun kullun amana billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusuli la nufarriqu bayna ahadin min rusuli wa qalu sami'na wa ata'na ghufranaka rabbana wa ilaykal masir." The messenger has believed in what has been revealed to him by his Lord, and so do those who follow him. All of them professed faith in God and his angels and his books and his messengers. So you see, all of these are enumerated here. They affirm, we do not discriminate between any of God's messengers. And they said, we heard and have obeyed. Lord, we seek your forgiveness and believe that on the day of judgment, to you shall we return. And also, dear viewers, the Prophet, while including a corollary of belief in God, which is the good and evil of the fate ordained by God, has referred to the set of belief in a very comprehensive way, in a very precise way, in the form of a hadith. So he has said that Iman is that you believe in God and his angels and his books and his messengers and the hereafter and the good and evil fate ordained by your God. So remember this thing which is called Antu'mina bil qadr khairihi wa sharrihi, the good and bad of the fate, is not something which is an independent tenet of faith. It is just a corollary of the fate or the faith of faith in God. Because if you have faith in God, then this is merely something which is a consequence of that you believe in the good and the bad of the fate, which means that things that are destined to come your way in the form of trials and things that are destined to come your way in the form of rewards, they are going to be there for you, and you have to be vigilant regarding them. Now, an important thing which Ustad Ghamidi has pointed out once he has done with the inner aspect of faith, he says that there are certain permanent requirements of Iman and there are certain contingent requirements. So, these permanent requirements of Iman or faith and these contingent requirements of Iman and faith, they should also be discussed separately. So, as far as the permanent ones are concerned, the first of them is righteous deeds, which, of course, if you have read the Quran, you'll find this to be copiously mentioned as Amal Salih. So you see, Allazina amanu wa amilus salihat. This expression abounds in the Quran. So this is a permanent requirement. You cannot say that it's a contingent one or it is dependent on circumstances. No, this is something that is a permanent one. It is always there. And the second is urging one another to the truth and urging one another to remain steadfast on it. And this is, of course, something that we all already know. It is found in the famous surah of the Quran that almost everyone knows by heart, Surah Asr. And both these things are mentioned here. It says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So time bears witness that these people shall definitely be in a state of loss. Yes, except those who accepted faith and did righteous deeds and urged one another to the truth and urged one another to remain steadfast on it. So you can clearly see that Surah Asr is basically signifying these two things. One is righteous deeds and other is urging one another to tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr, or urging one another to abide by the truth and remain steadfast by it. And if you look at the term Amilu Salihat or Amalu Saleh or Amalu Salihat, you see that all deeds which result once the morals of a person are purified are called righteous deeds. So if you are a morally upright person, then all the deeds that emanate from you are called righteous deeds. And all their bases are found in human intellect and nature, and the Sharia of God has been revealed to guide mankind towards these righteous deeds. So basically the purpose of the Sharia is to guide mankind to these righteous deeds. And as far as urging one another to the truth is concerned and to remain steadfast on it, this relates to one's immediate surroundings. So as an obvious requirement of accepting the truth, it is also termed as Amar bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar by the Quran, implying the fact that a person should exhort those in his surroundings to what is Ma'ruf. So Ma'ruf means something which is ethically good, something which is universally accepted as good according to human nature and intellect. And of course, Munkar is something which all mankind is unanimous in regarding it to be something which is morally not correct. And this term is also used in exactly the same way as we can use tawasi bil haq and tawasi bil sabr. So you can see that this is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Tawbah, which is the ninth surah, in these words: "Wal mu'minuna wal mu'minatu ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd ya'muruna bil ma'ruf wa yanhauna 'anil munkar." And believers, both men and women, are friends to one another. They enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. So this is something which is the same as to urge one another to what's good and what is righteous. And remember, this is something to be done in one's surroundings. It is not something to be done which is something beyond our own surrounding, because we are responsible primarily from our surroundings or regarding our surroundings. So every Muslim should fulfill this requirement of faith as a well-wisher of other Muslims. So if a person wants to fulfill this requirement with the right spirit, then it cannot be fulfilled unless he is a well-wisher of his fellow human beings. And so, as you can see, the Prophet is also reported to have said in a hadith that religion is well-wishing for God, for his book, for his messengers, for the rulers of the Muslims, and for their common masses. And this is a very famous narrative, starts off with ad-din and nasiha. So religion is to wish well for other people, is to always be a well-wisher of people. And as you can clearly see, that this is a foundational aspect of religion. So now we have discussed the permanent requirements of Iman or faith, which mean that these exist at all times. But then there are other requirements which we can call as contingent requirements of faith, which exist as and when required and according to a situation. So as far as the contingent requirements of faith are concerned, they are primarily three. Ustaz Ghamidi says that they are primarily three, and they are, as you can see, migrating or migration for the cause of religion, which is also called hijrah. Then secondly, we have helping the cause of religion, which is called nusra. And thirdly, it's adhering to justice. So these are the contingent requirements, which means that they arise whenever the situation demands them. So the permanent requirements are faith and righteous deeds, but these contingent requirements are emergent ones which are needed when the situation arises. So we will take them up one by one. So as far as the migration for the cause of religion is concerned, which is also called hijrah, it means that when it becomes difficult for a person to worship the Almighty, he is persecuted for his beliefs, and a stage comes when it becomes impossible for him to live as a declared Muslim. At this instance, his faith requires him to shift to another place where he can openly practice his faith. Now, in the terminology of the Quran, this is called migration or hijrah. And in the times of the Prophet, when God and his Prophet directly called people to it, those who evaded it were promised the dreadful doom of hell by the Almighty. So, such is the important thing, that if you are being persecuted for your religion, you're not able to practice your religion, and God and his Prophet call you to a place, and you also have that place readily available. And if you don't don't migrate there, then you are promised this dreadful doom. And the words that are used in the Quran are إن الذين توفاهم الملائكة ظالمي أنفسهم قالوا فيما كنتم قالوا كنا مستضعفين في الأرض قالوا ألم تكن أرض الله واسعة فتهاجروا فيها فأولئك مأواهم جهنم وساءت مصيرا. The angels will ask people whose souls they take in circumstances such that these people had wronged their souls. What will they ask? They will say, in what circumstances were you in? And they will reply, we were helpless and oppressed in the land. They will reply, the angels will say, was not the earth of God spacious enough for you to migrate to another place? It is these people whose abode shall be hell, and what an evil abode. So you see, such is the importance of this migration, that if you're not being able to practice your religion, then if there is a place which is available to you, then you have to go there, and you will not be given, you'll not have this liberty to present this excuse before the Almighty on the Day of Judgment that you were not being allowed to practice religion. You will surely be asked that if you had a place to go and freely practice your religion, why did you not go and migrate to that place? So this was the first contingent requirement, which means hijrah. Whenever the time comes, whenever the need is there, this is a requirement. The second is called nusra. And this is something which is called supporting the cause of religion. And so actually, it means that if there arises circumstances in which, for the purpose of protection or dissemination of religion, some action is required to be taken, remember, then it is a requirement of faith that one should offer this support through whatever means one can. In the terminology of the Quran, this is called nusrat or nusra of the Almighty. And when after the formation of the Islamic State in Medina, the Prophet required this help or nusra, and people were asked to present themselves for an armed struggle, the Quran called people for this nusra in the following words. It called them that now is your chance, now is you are required for this purpose. And the words of the Quran, as you can see, are Ya ayyuhallazina amanu hal adullukum ala tijaratin tunjikum min azabin alim tu'minuna billahi wa rasulihi wa tujahiduna fi sabilillahi bi amwalikum وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون يغفر لكم من ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن. I'm just going to read the translation first. Believers, shall I point out to you a deal that will save you from a woeful torment? Profess faith in God and His Messenger, and fight for God's cause with your life and wealth. This would be better for you if you understand. In return, God will forgive your sins and admit you to gardens below which streams of water flow. And as you can see, it says, ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ وَأُخْرَى تُحِبُّونَهَا نَصْرٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَتْحٌ قَرِيبٌ وبشر المؤمنين يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله. So, He will lodge you in pleasant mansions in eternal gardens. This is great success. And listen, He will also bestow upon you what you desire. Help from God and a victory which will soon come. And a prophet give these glad tidings to the faithful. Believers, be God's helpers in the way Jesus, son of Mary, said to his disciples, who will be my helper in the cause of God? The disciples said, we are God's helpers. So they see basically this responsibility of helping, of nusra, is described in these verses of Surah Saf. So we can say that all efforts which have been undertaken in the near or distant past for the protection, survival, and revival of religion have been undertaken to fulfill this requirement of faith. In Muslim history, the source of all these efforts, which were through the spoken or the written word, or through wealth and money, or through the sword and blade, is this very requirement of faith. The Quran asserts that if at some time this requirement arises and a true believer does not respond to it, then this is something that will not be acceptable. A true believer should give it the foremost priority, and nothing in this world should be dearer to him at that instant. So the Quran says, قل إن كان آباؤكم وأبناؤكم وإخوانكم وأزواجكم وعشيرتكم وأموال اقترفتموها وتجارة تخشون كسادها ومساكن ترضونها أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله وجهاد في سبيله فتربصوا حتى يأتي الله بأمره والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. Which means, O Prophet, tell them, if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your wives, your family, the wealth you have acquired, the merchandise you fear may not be sold, and the homes you like are dearer to you than God, His Prophet, and the struggle for His cause, then wait until God makes His judgment, and keep in mind that God does not guide such people who break their promise. So, such is the importance of this contingent requirement of faith. When the time comes, you have to help God with your persons and with your wealth. And if you don't, then of course, this is how the Quran says, Wallahu la yahdil qawm al-fasiqeen, that the Almighty is not going to guide such defiant people who break their promises. Now, this was the second contingent requirement. So the first was that you are going to migrate, or if you're being persecuted for religion and you have a place to migrate. The second is that you have to help God through the written word, the spoken word. It could be different for different cities, for different countries in different eras, publishing literature, maybe building mosques, educating people, publishing the Qurans. All these things, they form they come under this broad category of Nusra. The third of these categories is called Qiyam bil Qist by the Quran, or adhering to justice. Now, if emotions, vested interests, and biases try to divert a person from justice in some worldly or religious matter, his faith requires him not only to adhere to justice, but also if his witness is required in these matters, he should do so even if this puts his life in danger. He should uphold the truth by saying what is the truth and surrendering before it. He must always resign himself and consign himself before the truth. He should adhere to justice and bear witness to it and stick to it in his beliefs and deeds. And this adherence to justice is called Qiyam bil Qist by the Quran. And in the Quran, it has been used or described in the following words. It says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qist shuhada'a lillahi walau ala anfusikum awil walidaini wal aqrabin in yakun ghaniyan aw faqiran فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. Believers, adhere to justice by bearing witness to it for God, even though it be against yourselves, your parents, or your kinfolk. If someone is rich or poor, God only is more worthy for both. So, do not be led by base desires by leaving his guidance, lest as a result you swerve from the truth. And if you distort what is true and just or evade it, you should remember that God is well aware of what you do. So such is the importance of adhering to justice. And then, of course, this is also found in another instance in the Quran, in which the Quran says that you have to be just against your enemies as well. So not just internal justice, but external justice also. And in such cases, the words used by the Quran, of course, in Surah Maida, the 8th verse is, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kunu qawwamina lillahi shuhada'a bil qist wala yajrimannakum shana'anu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu i'dilu wa aqrabu lit-taqwa wattaqullaha innallaha khabirum bima ta'malun. Believers, be those who adhere to justice by bearing witness to it for God, and your animosity for some people should not induce you to turn away from justice. Be just. This is nearer to piety, and have fear of God. Indeed, God is well aware of all your deeds. So you see that the Quran has made it amply clear that not only this justice regarding your own friends and your own relatives is required. And about that, the Quran has already said that if you bear witness to the truth and if it goes against the interests of your family, your relatives, and your own self, even then you must bear this witness. And then externally, it says that you have to be just to your enemy as well. And it should not be the case that if your enemy is there in front of you and it is on justice in some case, in a case, and you are sitting in the seat of the judge or on the seat of the judge, and you are being asked to give your verdict, then merely because someone is standing there as your enemy, it should not be reason enough for you to defy justice. Even then, you must administer justice. Such is the importance of justice. So these were the three contingent requirements of faith. So remember, the permanent ones were faith, professing faith, and doing righteous deeds, and of course uh, adhering and urging other people to do justice, to truth, and to adhere to that truth. So these were the two permanent requirements. And as far as the three contingent ones are concerned, they are, of course, one by one. If you take them in order, the first of them is that if you're required to migrate because of persecution, then you have to. The second one is qiyam bil qist, which means the second one actually, as you can clearly see, is that you have to support the cause of truth, which is called nusrat, and the third one is that you have to adhere to justice, which is qiyam bil qist. Next, Ustaz Ghamidi says that what exactly is the objective of religion? Because once you are through with the contents and all the details, then what exactly is the purpose of religion? So he says that the purpose of this religion, which itself is stated by the Quran, it is called tazkiyah. This means that the individual and collective lives of people should be purified and their beliefs and deeds be developed in the right direction. At many places in the Quran, it has been mentioned that the objective of mankind is to enter paradise, in which they will be pleased with their Lord and their Lord will be pleased with them. And only those people have been promised paradise who have purified their souls. So you can see that on such instances, the Quran has said, قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى, which means that tazkiyah is the objective and purpose of religion. Tazkiyah is the objective and purpose of religion. It is for this end that the prophets were sent. They were sent, and the whole religion was revealed to guide mankind in attaining this objective. So that is why we see this verse from the Quran, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. It is he who has sent forth among the unlettered a messenger from their own who recites to them his revelations, purifies them, and for this he instructs them in the Sharia and in the Hikmah. So in other words, as far as the objective of Islam is concerned, it is nothing but to purify people in their individual and collective lives. It was precisely for this purpose that the prophets of God were sent, and Prophet Muhammad was sent for this purpose. And the manner in which it would occur is that he will deliver the religion, deliver the contents of religion, which means that the al-hikmah and the sharia will be given by him to people, and by following the hikmah and the sharia, they will become people who have purified themselves. So remember, tazkiyah is not something which is over and above or has some other meaning to it or has some extra practices. Tazkiyah is attained merely by following religion, the contents of religion. Now we come to the last aspect of this framework of Islam, and that is what exactly is the correct religious attitude which the Quran has actually outlined. So the correct attitude which the followers of this religion should adopt is called Ihsan. You must have heard this word, Ihsan. It means to do something in the best possible way. The best possible way. So when some religious duty is carried out in a manner that a complete balance is maintained between its form and spirit, every constituent of it is taken fully into consideration, and a person does the deed in a manner that he considers himself to be standing before God. Standing before God, and this attitude is called Ihsan. And the Quran has actually outlined it in a very, very emphatic verse. It says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. And who has a better religion than he who submits to God, such that he does ihsan and follows the faith of Abraham, who was devoted to God. So remember, the word ihsan is not the same word that we often come across in the Urdu language, in which it means to do a favor to someone, over and above something. The word ihsan, the way it is used in the Arabic language, it means to do something in the best possible way, not compromise, not come to a lower category, but the highest category. So that is what the Quran wants us. If we want to pray, then it should be the best possible prayer that we should at least aspire for. Similarly, if you have to fast, then it should not be just going through the motions. It should be in the best possible way, and so on and so forth. Prophet Muhammad has also explained this word ihsan in a very subtle way. And he has said that al-ihsan an ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarah fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak, which means that ihsan is that you worship God as if you are seeing him, because if you are not able to see him, he surely sees you. And mind you, this is not an easy undertaking. So you're doing something in the presence of God as if God is witnessing you. He is observing you. You are answerable to him. You are being watched by him. So if this is something that you can sort of always imagine, that whenever I'm doing something good, I am in the presence of God, he is watching me, then the inspiration that you'll get immediately would be to do that thing in the best possible way, because God is watching you. So that is why the Prophet Muhammad says that al-ihsan means an ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarahu, that you worship God. And the word worship is not used here in its limited meaning. It means to carry out the duty of God, which of course also includes worship and obedience, and it is inclusive of that obedience as well. So you do those things as if you are being watched by God, and obviously you are not seeing God, but remember, he is seeing you. So viewers, this in 10 points is the whole framework of Islam as presented by Ustaz Ghamidi. As I said, that it might appear to you to be a simplification, whereas if you might at times match it or compare it with the other frameworks of Islam that have been presented by other prominent authorities and scholars, you'll find how he diverges from this topic or diverges from their interpretation, and claims that this is the interpretation according to him, which is the one which the Sahaba stood for. As I said, comparative study of this interpretation or framework with other frameworks is at the moment beyond our scope of study, but inshallah, maybe some other series we might be doing that, because that is also important, because unless you are able to compare and contrast things, it does not really give you the true concept or true picture of things. So with this, I come to an end to my today's talk, and if you have any questions, please raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. For participants with questions, you can either raise your hand or you can type your questions in the chat. And if you'd like to remain anonymous, you can send them directly to me. Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum.
Sir, in the objective of religion, there is a line in the verse 87, 14 to 17. In fact, you give preference to this worldly life in spite of the fact that the life to come is better and more lasting. So what exactly is the meaning? I mean, can you please define it more in detail? Like, what is what is the conflict between the religious and the worldly life? So God is saying in such a way.
So actually, I mean, this is a very simple thing that you can ask yourself as well. That whenever there is a clash of responsibilities, when there is a clash of things that you do, if you find that your worldly responsibilities or your worldly duties or your worldly engagements are clashing with the call of God, with the responsibilities which God has imposed upon you, it is on such instance that God wants you to give preference to religion, to his duty. So imagine your scenarios in which there could be this conflict. For example, this could be that you are watching something very interesting, you are busy in something very interesting, and the time of the prayer comes. Now there is this clash, that there is a call of God, which is his duty, his preference, that this is the time for the prayer. Yes, of course, it is a bracket of time, which means that you can offer that prayer in that bracket of time. But imagine that that time is expiring and slowly going away. I mean, you're just diminishing your time and opportunity. So what would you do? I mean, if, for example, you're engaged in a game or maybe reading something or doing something else. So this is a challenge that is posed before you, that now either you continue with that engagement that you are, or you stop that engagement and come to the call of God, do your duty, and then go back. So basically, preference to the duty of God, to the call of God. And I've just given you one example. There could be other examples as well. Another example that comes to my mind would be that, for example, your child is sick and you are required to be at home and to look after him or to take him to a doctor, but you have maybe plans to go to a movie, or you have plans to go to some other engagement or some other party, and you delegate that duty to someone else, or you don't take enough interest. Now your responsibility, your moral responsibility, was to look after your ailing child or maybe your ailing parent, but you shirked that responsibility. So now again there was a clash. One was that you wanted to go out somewhere, and the other one was the call of God, which is your moral duty. So, I mean, you can imagine several such circumstances and scenarios in which your moral and religious duty, they clash with your worldly engagements. So whenever that takes place, the requirement of faith, as you can see from this verse of Surah Allah, is that you must give preference to your religious duty. This does not mean that you cannot indulge in other activities. It is only that when there is a clash and you have a preference to make, you have a choice to make, you have a call to make, then that call must not be sacrificed. It must not be at the cost of your worldly engagements.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I just had a follow-up on that. This commands of God, I mean, the ones which I have to be given priority, is it for only 5 pillars of Islam, that is offering prayer, zakat, fasting?
It does not. I mean, those 5 pillars they just represent the aspects of faith. I mean, they don't outline your duties. They just outline your responsibility to believe in God, to believe in the hereafter. So these are basically tenets of your belief. So that's a different chapter. What we're talking about here is your duty towards God. And that duty towards God, of course, could be a moral duty. It could be a duty regarding your worship rituals. It could be a duty regarding any social aspect or anything. For example, there could be another scenario in which you are needed to bear witness to the truth in a court of law, and there is a criminal who is there, and someone needs your witness because only you can identify that person who has done something bad, maybe raped someone or done something which is against. It could be a heinous crime. So you're now required there, but you shirk your responsibility. You say, okay, I'm not going to go there because I have some other responsibilities or I have some other engagement. Again, that would be shirking your moral responsibility. So basically, these are your moral responsibilities which arise on that occasion. And I can tell you very much with clarity that you'll be unmistakably, you'll go there, you'll immediately realize that these are your responsibilities. You would not need to be reminded because they are so natural and they are so spontaneous that if you just ask yourself, it will tell you now that this is your responsibility and this should be given preference.
Thank you so much, sir.
Amar Farooq, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
जी, मेरा सवाल हिजरा के बारे में है कि मतलब इन करंट सर्कमस्टांसेस जो है ये एक इंडिविजुअल डिसीजन होगा या ये एज अ टोटल भी लिया जा सकता है, और अगर टोटल होगा तो क्या हर एक बंदे के ऊपर ये कंपलसरी हो सकता है? क्योंकि इन द करंट सर्कमस्टांसेस जो है लोगों की परसेप्शन डिफरेंट होती है डिफरेंट सर्कमस्टांसेस के बाद।
So remember, hijrah is not something which is to be done ordinarily. It's something in which you are being persecuted. I mean, there are very few places in this world today in which this persecution is going on, which means that, for example, you are not allowed to pray, you're not allowed to fast, you're not allowed to do your basic duties. You have to find such places. They might not be very common to find. So if this is the scenario that you cannot practice your religion, and then you also have the option to go to some other place. This could be a collective decision. It could be an individual decision. I mean, this is besides the point. The thing is that basically it is addressed to you. And yes, there could be other people also who are being persecuted. So they have to take their individual decision. And once they take that decision individually, then they can collectively migrate. But the second important thing is that there must be a place available to you where you can go. So remember, in the times of the Prophet, there were no such things as visas or passports. You could just leave your place and go to another land. There were no such restrictions. These have arisen in the last 3 centuries, where boundaries have been created, countries have been formed, and now you just cannot leave your place ordinarily in normal circumstances in a way that you would like to have done in the past. So now you have to first have the resources. You must have a visa. You must have not just a visa, maybe. other things as well. But yes, there is one thing which even today you will find, and that is what we call asylum. So people who are persecuted for their faith, they seek asylum. For example, our Ahmadi brothers, they have been persecuted for their faith in countries like Pakistan, and for this they have sought asylum in the UK, in some other countries, and they have been given this asylum. Similarly, there could be other individuals who could be persecuted for their religious beliefs, and if they seek asylum and that asylum is given to them, then that the country who gives that asylum, remember, in today's times, not only provides a place for that person or that family to live, but also enough maintenance and enough amount for for the livelihood of that family. It's like a scholarship that's given to them so that they can live there in peace and without having any threat to their own lives. So this is this is a living example that you can see even today, that a lot of Ahmadi brothers and sisters, they migrate from countries like Pakistan and some other countries. Malaysia is another example because they don't allow the Ahmadis to be there. So they go to places, mostly Western countries, who give them this asylum. Canada gives asylum, Czechoslovakia gives asylum, Sri Lanka gives this asylum, and of course the UK also.
Thank you very much. Oh, did you have a follow-up? Please go ahead.
बस जस्ट शॉर्ट के मेरा मतलब ये है कि अगर एक जगह पे इसी कोई कंडीशन में कुछ लोग चाहे कलेक्टिव डिसीजन भी कर लें, लेकिन कुछ लोगों का अगर ये कहना हो कि अभी परसिक्यूशन लेवल हम टॉलरेट कर सकते हैं, तो ये इंडिविजुअल डिसीजन ही होगा, क्योंकि ये मामला अल्लाह मियां के पास उनका जाएगा. यानी ये तो नहीं कह सकते कि
of course that will be always be an individual decision. You are answerable for not being able to pray, or not being able to, for example, fast, or not being able to openly practice your religion. So it is you are who is going to be answerable. But what I said is that at times a group of people are dealt with in the same way. So the decision will be individual, but because all the individuals have come up to the same decision, so ultimately they can do it on a mass scale, or as a collectivity.
Shukriya.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Salman Aziz, please go ahead.
The framework
The framework of Islam.
Yeah, reduced from Quran. But the basic question arises, which might have been asked you many times, and Ustad Ghamidi also, that how can we differentiate different surahs and ayats of Quran? Because at times we have a surah which is directly addressing the Quran and talking about Lahab, talking about the Jews of that time, and there are a few ayats that are related to these times. So how can we differentiate between what is for us and what is for us?
So I think I've explained this in a course that I was teaching earlier on. It's called Understanding. It was called the Analytical Study of the Quran. So I gave several examples in those lectures and sessions. Marie might give you a link to those sessions. So basically, those sessions were meant to give you this information that how you can make this distinction. But one very prominent, there are several, but one very prominent way in which you can make this distinction is that there is a singular practice which is a distinctive feature of the era of God's messengers. And that practice is not carried forth in the post-prophetic era, which is the era in which we are living. And that is that God sets up a miniature day of judgment in the times of his messengers, and people who intentionally deny their messenger, they are punished in this very world. So if you look at things like apostasy, if you look at things like jihad that was being carried out against the idolaters, if you look at punishment against disbelief, all these things are related to the prophetic era, or the era of the messengers of God, because basically it is God who is administering these punishments, and he's kept these punishments to himself. So basically these are three punishments. One is apostasy, the other is disbelief, and the third is polytheism. So the punishment of polytheism, the punishment of disbelief, and the punishment of apostasy, they were to be administered only and only in the times of God's messengers, because it was God who was doing so. But once this era has passed, today none can be punished because of apostasy or disbelief or polytheism. So all of these people, they are allowed to freely choose and live. Nothing can be imposed on them. Their account will be settled by God on the day of judgment. So I've just given you one broad example. Of course, there are other nuances as well, but broadly, these three areas, that the punishment of apostasy, disbelief, and polytheism, in the times of God's messengers was given by these messengers on behalf of God on this earth in their own times. But once they have passed away, these punishments, which are God's prerogative, only God can give them. He gave them in his messenger's era because he was directly in charge of the affairs, and he's going to give them on the day of judgment. But in the post-prophetic era, which means the era from Prophet Muhammad to the day of judgment, these are no longer applicable. So this is an example that you can, from which you can understand.
Sir, why the history is taught to us? Why these ayat about Quraysh is told to us?
So the basic reason for being taught to us verses which no longer apply to us is to tell us that the accountability of these nations took place in this world at the behest of God. And if our accountability, people living in the post-prophetic era, is not taking place, it doesn't mean that it shall never take place. It's just being deferred to the day of judgment. So basically, these verses and all these specific verses remind us that God's accountability is going to come one day. For these nations, if you read the Quran, if you read the Bible, they came in this world, showing that God is going to hold people responsible for their actions. But in the post-prophetic era, a person who is doing evil might be punished or might not be punished. And similarly, a person who is doing good, at times he is most miserable in this world, and at times he's also well placed. So in the post-prophetic era, there are people who live in mixed fortunes. It's not essential that if you do good, you'll end up at the top of the society or you'll always be there. Similarly, if you're a bad person, it's not essential that you'll be punished in this world. At times, the most evil of people are at the top of the society. So in this post-prophetic era, when we read the Quran, it should come to us that we will also not escape accountability. Just as these nations were held accountable in their own times, our accountability shall also come. The only thing is that it has been deferred to the day of judgment. So that is why these verses still exist.
Sir, you gave a good example about polytheism, apostasy. But what is the logic behind defining these particular three things that were meant for that time and not applicable today?
Because you see, God says that polytheism is something only He can judge, whether a person has intentionally denied or not. Similarly, disbelief is something only He can judge. Because you see, these things relate to one's inner beliefs, one's inner self. I cannot be a judge of someone. So in the times of God's messengers, God was judging people and communicating His judgment to His messengers. So they were taking this action. Today, God no longer communicates the way He did in the prophetic era, because He would communicate to His messengers. The institution of wahi or revelation has been terminated. So today also people exist who are apostates, so to speak, or could be kafirs and who could be mushriks, and they deserve to be punished. But the thing is, because they have not been delivered the truth by God's messenger of God, and secondly, we do not know who among them is intentionally denying a messenger of God. So because of the fact that this feature is absent from the post-prophetic era, we just cannot take any action against such people. So that is why, these three things have been singled out, because it is these three things that make the difference in punishing people in this world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
Sir, I had a question with regards to ruling for migration in countries where Muslims are persecuting Muslims, like Iran or Afghanistan, or in India maybe as well. So what is it still an individual decision, or the ruling of Hijra applies on these people as well?
So you see, I cannot be a judge for that. The person himself or herself has to judge. The principle should be clear to such people, and that is that this persecution is something in which they are not being able to freely, from their own freedom, in winning their freedom, they are able to practice their faith. If this is the case, then the one part of the responsibility is to think about migration. Now, the second part is, of course, if they can get that place, if they can obtain and acquire that place, because as I said, it was quite easy in the earliest of times. Today, it is not that easy. It involves a lot of expenses. It involves a lot of other details. Yes, one thing, as I said, as an example, was asylum is something, if that is available, and you can seek that asylum from other countries, because in that case, the place would be provided to you, the expenses would also be provided to you. But if you don't have that asylum, then migrating, even if you're persecuting, is not an easy job, unless, of course, you are very resourceful or you have a place to go. So that's what I'm saying, that basically, in the absence of asylum, that responsibility would become an obligation only when you are in a position to go to a place where you can settle down and start afresh. Today, it's not easy to leave your own country with all these visa restrictions. As I said earlier on, the only thing that can circumvent it is that asylum part, in which if you apply for that asylum, then many countries, they grant you that asylum, and in which case then you can go easily.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I had a question too in regards to the Nasr part that you were talking about. So, like, there are so many protests that are going around in US regarding Palestine. I personally abhor protests, and I find them very barbaric a lot of times. Does that mean that I'm not participating in Nasruddin? Because I feel like, okay.
I mean, you see, that's a personal choice. It has to convince you that this is the need of the hour. And if the need of the hour is something in which you think that a protest can be effective, it will not cause any vandalism, it will not put the lives of people into danger. So all these aspects have to be taken into account. Just thinking per se that, well, because there's being a protest held for a righteous cause, then I have to go there, that's not reason enough. You have to be convinced that the protest is going to be consequential, it can result in something substantial, and at the same time, the nature of that protest is that it will not inconvenience people, it will not put them to inconvenience, it will not cause any hooliganism, any vandalism or destruction of public property. So all these things have to be thought about. And if you think that, well, this is one way of letting the conscience of the collectivity of the world know that, well, they are doing something wrong, then obviously peaceful protests are things that have taken they have really proved their point. Look at what has happened in Bangladesh just about a month ago. So they were persecuted, they were wronged, and they stood their ground, and they were able to bring about a big change. So it all depends on the situation and how you perceive that.
That did result in the loss of quite a few lives in Bangladesh, though.
So remember, that loss was not that they were being offensive. It was the government who were persecuting them, or it had become the offense giver in that matter. It was trying to retaliate. So basically, people were killed in innocence. I mean, they did not have anything that you can say was the fault that lied with them vis-a-vis the protest. I mean, they were not killing someone, so they were just being killed in return. So it did result. So it was like a sacrifice that they offered. They did not put any public property in danger. Yes, there were sporadic instances in which this also took place, but by and large, if you look at the scenario, I think it was successful. In this limited capacity in which they were able to dislodge a very unjust and a very tyrannical ruler.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Thanks for another wonderful session, and inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you.